Welcome back to JSA TV Live, where we are coming to you from the show floor of Yada in sunny Las Vegas, Nevada. We are covering the latest trend stories and innovations from leaders across the digital infrastructure industry. And joining me now, we've got Jim Summers of GPC Infrastructure. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me here.
And we know you are a first timer on JSA TV, so welcome.
I am indeed. It's great to be here and excited for the interview.
We always have to give some special love to our new friends who come and join us on JSA.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
So, you know, GPC and you bring 30 plus years of experience in energy and natural gas to your role as CEO and co-founder.
Yeah.
So how does that perspective and the background in energy really set you apart and set you up for success in what you're doing now?
Yeah. So I guess the math I think it's 35 years now that I've been doing this or some version of this. So it's interesting when you've been around a long time. So it's a nice way of saying, hey, you're old. What have you learned? But I think one of the unique perspectives, and I started as a young engineer with Conoco in the natural gas side of the business. And so had really started when natural gas was deregulating and the business that drove, how that changed North America, moved from natural gas into power kind of in the late 90s. When power was deregulating, we were seeing blackouts in California, and there was a move to expand natural gas-driven power capacity in North America. So that's where I kind of shifted into power markets and learned a lot about that dynamic, both from a physical perspective, how do you build those facilities, moved into marketing and trading, what are the commercial side of the business, and learned a lot through that experience. And, you know, at that time, cogeneration, meaning on-site power generation for large industrial facilities, like chemical plants, refineries, pulp and paper, was a big part of what I did. And it was a fantastic solution that the energy industry had implemented for those industries. It made a lot of sense. Moved from that into renewable energy, spent several years in a renewable energy company, and then went back around to kind of back to my roots in gas and power. And so I think to the perspective is having lived through multiple cycles, there are solutions that have been implemented in other parts of the industry that are applicable. There are mistakes that have been made, and I've made a lot of them, that you can kind of bring that expertise into this market. So it's been fascinating to share those learnings, that expertise. I think beyond the technical expertise, I think having built multiple companies over the years from a perspective of alignment and partnership, you know, having an approach to work with customers to help them navigate markets in transition, I think is also unique about what GPC does. So there's the technical expertise, the experience, but also the approach of how do you deal with the market that's evolving and changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have to say, they're not mistakes, they're lessons learned, right?
I love that.
Lessons
Let's
learned,
go with
my
that.
friend.
Lessons learned.
I like it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more about power and how
Yeah.
you're able to apply your background to solving for that dilemma right now. You know, Gartner has recently predicted that 40% of AI data centers could face power availability constraints by 2027. And of course, depending on who you're talked to, there's more issues now than people might want to let on to. So how do you see on-site natural gas solutions addressing these challenges?
Yeah, and that's really the reason we built GPC. And GPC, by the way, stands for gas-powered compute. So you're not particularly clever, but you know what we do. And so the idea is that the utilization of on-site natural gas, so using generating your own power, taking back into your own control how you're going to manage that power demand, it is really the transition that's occurring right now in the market. And so when we look at, to your question about constraint, right, and what's happening. So if you look at what I'll call the power grid, when we say the power grid, it's really a collection of multiple utilities around the country. We've kind of not expanded it in about the last 20 years. So again, when I was coming up and we had a lot of growth in the power industry and we were trying to address shortages around the country, we built a lot of generation, a lot of gas-fired generation. We did not expand transmission, and we have not expanded transmission in the last 20 years. So for about 20 years, power demand was relatively flat. And so what's happened with the advent primarily of data centers, but also electrification of the oil patch, electric vehicles, other drivers, but primarily, you know, data centers driving that demand, the utilities have been unprepared. The grid has been unprepared to manage that increase in demand. And it's not just, we don't have enough electricity generation, we don't have enough transmission to move the generation. We do have the power from point A to point B. And so we're in a bind. So all of a sudden, where it was not a big issue to get power, Now data centers are going back to the utility asking for power, and they're getting 5-year, 7-year, in some cases 10-year lead times. That's created a real challenge. We think what's a fascinating and elegant opportunity to address that is to pivot from reliance on the grid to a shift to self-reliance, if you will, where we're accessing massive amounts of natural gas that we have in this country, to take back that control and to generate on site, just as many of those heavy industrial customers did earlier in my career.
Let's talk for just a moment about that. You often say, and we often hear people say, that pipelines equal access. So
Right.
what is that reality the operators really need to understand about gas supply and pipelines and the access and how that all works?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a complex question. So what's interesting, so we produce natural gas all over this country, and so that gas is produced by what we call the upstream sector, or people that drill the wells, poke the holes, drill the wells, collect that natural gas. But it's all over the country. I have gas that's produced in the Marcellus, which is in the Northeast, a lot in Texas and the Rockies. That gas has to get moved to where the markets are. So often where you find the natural gas isn't where the demand is. So for the last 70 years, we've built up a pipeline network. If it crosses state boundaries, those are interstate pipelines. If it's in-state, it's an intrastate pipeline. But several million miles of pipelines that move that gas to market. What's really interesting is about 10 years ago, that pipeline network was thrown a curveball, and that curveball is shifting from conventional development to unconventional shale development, hydraulic fracturing. We went as a net importer of oil in this country to a net exporter. What that meant is the expansion of pipelines into regions that were producing gas that hadn't produced gas in the past. So the expansion of that pipeline network has been a very dynamic, very active growth story, unlike what we're seeing in the grid. So by accessing the pipelines, we're able to access the supply. What's complicated is the pipelines are regulated just to move the gas from point A to point B. So you're actually buying physical gas from a producer in a producing region where it's made. You're transporting that gas with somebody else that's owning and operating the pipeline, and you're doing that under firm transportation agreements to make sure that you have that for the long term. And then once you receive the gas, you're balancing the intraday consumption. So the reality is, in order to manage the gas supply, which is one of the more complex components of on-site gas generation, you're really managing all of those pieces of the puzzle. And so having access and understanding that is, again, a big reason why we created GPC, is to navigate that path.
Yeah. I want to talk too, and you've mentioned a moment ago about, sustainability and being a little bit more sustainable.
Yeah.
There are some myths in the industry around just on-site power generation, and particularly when it comes to sustainability. So how are you addressing these misconceptions, especially as it's related to natural gas? What are you guys doing?
We talked about this, and I'm super glad to talk about sustainability, right? And I have a passion around this. I used to work at a renewable energy company where we built solar and wind and biogas and you name it. And I think the generation of energy is a passion. I think what's really unique about on-site generation and natural gas for on-site generation is, number one, there's an efficiency benefit. So if you think about generating power on the grid, you're not often generating next door, right? It's generated a county away or 2 counties away or somewhere that's remote. There's transmission that has to move that power to the location. Anytime you move power on a transmission line, you're losing efficiency. So you're immediately losing efficiency. You're also dealing with a lot of older generation equipment in this country that's less efficient. So you have the opportunity, by putting generation on site, of increasing the efficiency. In other words, the amount of energy I put into the system, I get a higher percent back out again. The other thing you're able to do is capture on-site waste heat. So you have a lot of wasted heat. By capturing that wasted heat, you can put that to heat, because it's really just energy. So you can put that heat to work to make more electricity, to run absorption chillers in lieu of electric chillers, to create a cooling stream. So now, instead of the grid being 30 to 35% efficient, which is kind of how the grid operates after transmission losses, you can be 80 to 85% efficient. So you're getting twice the energy out, which means half the emissions. So when you think about what's happening on the grid, if you step back, the efficiency of the grid is about half what on-site generation can be. The other thing that's happening is, because the demand pull is so great, we're keeping coal on longer than we would otherwise keep it on. So not only are emissions, less for on-site generation, but they're actually going up on the grid because we're having to keep coal on longer. And that's something that I think is exciting to think about where natural gas plays. I mean, certainly solar, wind, renewables as part of a grid solution, absolutely critical. But if you look at the grid overall, it's still heavily powered by coal. It's still heavily powered by less efficient natural gas. And we have the opportunity through on-site generation to really have a much more sustainable approach as we wait on things like nuclear fusion. And the other thing about on-site generation, specifically data centers, is it needs to be baseload generation. It needs to be dispatchable. It needs to be manageable. And gas provides an opportunity to do all that. And the last thing I'll say is the equipment you put in for natural gas today is the same equipment that can burn renewable natural gas from a landfill or a digester. It's the same equipment in a hydrogen-based economy that you can utilize with no pollution. So I think there's a sustainability story around on-site natural gas, which is part of the benefit, in addition to the economic benefit, the reliability, the speed of market that I think a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
I love this notion. And I think I'm writing a chapter for JSA in the upcoming book specifically on this to talk about the benefits of natural gas and sustainability.
I cannot wait for that. I'm loving everything that I'm learning from you as we're sitting here talking. I'm just happy to be a student and to soak in all of the information. You've just got a lot of it. But last thing I'll ask you real quickly before we let you get out of here is, what role do you see in the future for on-site power generation and natural gas specifically?
Yeah, we see it as a big part of the solution. What's fascinating, about a year ago, we stepped into the market to have a lot of conversations. And the idea of natural gas was, again, we still are relying on the grid. For most of the data center operations we have, we're going to plug in, get electricity from the grid, and gas maybe we'll look at for backup. A year later, I can tell you, every single data center conversation I'm in, there is discussion around a natural gas strategy and on-site natural gas being a part of the way that they're approaching the market. So we see it's gone from, 2 years ago, natural gas maybe for backup. Now, natural gas is an essential part of the strategy. And we think, again, every situation is a little bit different. Every market is different. We think that the grid will expand. The grid will be a part of that. But on-site natural gas, again, for the reliability, ability to control your own destiny, access to the market quicker, it absolutely, our vision is that will be a much bigger part of the solution. And those are the conversations we're having with data centers. Every single one, it is a part of that strategy.
Yeah, it's a very big and evolving piece of the puzzle. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And so we're glad to be here at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is the right place at the right time also to have this good conversation. So thank you so much for stopping by. It's been a pleasure talking to you and just soaking up all of the information from you. So thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Stick around. We've got much more to come live from the show floor of Yada.